Murdered for defending the environment. The rights group Global Witness says a record number of activists were killed last year. So why aren't environmentalists being protected? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Around the world, environmental activists are being arrested, jailed, even killed for trying to protect our planet. The UK-based group Global Witness has recorded the highest number of murders since it began its annual survey a decade ago. 212 people were killed in 2019 for campaigning against issues such as illegal logging, mining and deforestation. Global Witness believes the rise may be due to activists becoming more outspoken about climate change. Colombia had the highest death toll at 64. This activist survived an attack that involved grenades and automatic weapons for resisting illegal mining in her community.
Being an environmental leader today is a threat to Colombia. It is a threat in Colombia, and it is a threat worldwide because here we are fighting two life projects or two political projects. There is a political project of death, and when we confront large-scale mining, we confront this extractive mining. We confront a model that is destroying the environment. We become a military target. We do not have weapons, but we do have a voice to continue defending the future of a country, to continue defending the future of humanity.
It's also a huge problem in the Philippines. It's one of the worst places in Asia for attacks against environmental defenders. The number of murders there has risen to 43. The Philippines and Colombia account for more than half of all the reported killings last year, two-thirds of which happened in Latin America. The Amazon region alone saw 33 deaths, and 40% of all victims were from indigenous communities. And while the most number of deaths were among defenders who opposed mining and large-scale agriculture, logging remains the sector with the highest increase in global killings since 2018. Let's bring in our guests. In London, we have Chris Madden. He's a senior campaigner at Global Witness and the author of this report. In Sao Paulo, we have multimedia journalist Sam Cowie. And in Jakarta, we have Wahyu Perdana. He's a campaign manager at the Indonesian Forum for Environment. Welcome to you all. I want to begin in London with you, Chris Madden. 212 people. It's a big number of people that have been killed, a record number, as you've pointed out. But can you just explain to me, what do we mean when we mean environmentalists? We're not really talking about scientists or activists who are tying themselves to trees. We're talking people within the local community who are just fighting and defending their rights to farm their land, to go about their business, and they're being put under pressure by big business. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, yes. So we define land and environmental defenders as anyone who takes a stand for their own land rights or the rights of to have a safe and healthy environment, and do so in a peaceful manner. And as you said, these are people often at a community level coming against large-scale industry, whether that's mining, logging, or large-scale agribusiness.
How confident are you in the numbers? I mean, what's your methodology when it came to actually putting this report together?
Well, certainly we've used the same methodology since 2012. So we rely on public online reports of these attacks against land and environmental defenders. Obviously, we are restricted by what is available online. So there are jurisdictions and areas where we can't access information, where there isn't a free press. But certainly, our methodology encapsulates all of the information where we can find that information. So it's never going to show the full absolute picture, but it's an indication of the trend. And as you said, this year, unfortunately, we have to again say that attacks are rising against land and environmental defenders.
Well, let's go to Sam Cowie in Sao Paulo. You've been covering this story for a very long time. You've been taking a look at what it means to be an environmentalist and human rights activist who is being attacked by the government or big business. Are you confident in Global Witness's numbers?
Yeah, if anything, I would say that Global Witness's numbers are extremely conservative, quite frankly. Usually, according to local organizations that we see here in Brazil, at least, the numbers are far higher. So, and it's often very difficult to get a full reading of these numbers. Often these are crimes that are committed in very far-flung areas, murders that we don't hear about, murders that are often covered up by local authorities, because most of the time in far-flung places like where I report from in the Amazon in Brazil, usually if the authorities are not at least complicit with this violence against local communities, then they are directly involved in some way or another. Now, this might come in the form of corrupt local mayors, corrupt local politicians of different stripes, or corrupt local businessmen. And in Brazil and in Latin America in general, especially the Amazon region, the violent scramble for natural resources and land is on at any cost, basically. And environmental defenders, as featured in the Global Witness report, they really bear the brunt of this violence.
Let me go to Jakarta now and Wahyu Perdana. Are you confident in Global Witness's reports and the numbers, or do you think they're either too low or too high?
At the fact that too low, because we have many recorded, all that data taken before the updated. Because at the fact after the government, they decided by the new investment law, the conflict is become higher and rising to big numbers. That will be problem, because now in the name of the investment and the name of the economic, many criminalization and many victims, especially in extractive industries area and infrastructure project. Almost the biggest is come from the Belt Road Initiative project. That the fact what we're facing now. I think not just the environmental activists, including the peasant and labor organization.
Chris Madden, both our guests there have said your numbers might be too low.
Well, certainly. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about what we require to be able to include a particular attack in our database. So we need to have three credible online sources or reports directly from partners working on closer to the ground and more aware of the local circumstances. Obviously, as a global report, we can't know about everything everywhere, so it's really just trying to show the general trend globally. And I'd add as well, we are also trying to draw attention to the broader range of attacks that land environmental defenders face. So it's the killings, I guess, is the sort of ultimately tragic end, but before that stage happens, they're often facing, death threats, non-lethal attacks, criminalization by governments, as I think Sam mentioned, and a whole range of attacks that, again, often really doesn't get reported. So it's very hard to track at a sort of systematic global level.
Sam, it is a very interesting point. When I was in Pakistan, I covered on a few occasions illegal logging mafias. Now, these were people who were given the rights to log, but they would be a mafia. They would take more wood than they needed, and they would oftentimes just bully people who actually complained about them. It's a fairly similar situation in Sao Paulo, but Jair Bolsonaro is not a big environmentalist, and actually he has ties to these groups, all right? Whether it's legal groups, big business, agribusiness, but he's not doing anything about this, is he?
Well, look, I mean, the president was selected, President Jair Bolsonaro, he was elected with overwhelming support from the agribusiness sector. And this is a group that, commands a significant presence in Congress, a significant influence in Congress. And, they essentially are lobbying the whole time to reduce the size of indigenous reserves, open up indigenous reserves to mining. And on the ground, like I say, in far-flung places, far away from capitals, these places are often very poor. Law enforcement is, minimal, or often it's corrupt. these messages from the president that, oh, we're going to reduce the size of indigenous reserves, that has a direct effect on the ground. That means directly, often through networks of misinformation, sometimes fake news. We've even heard about this before, fake news messages going around on WhatsApp that Bolsonaro said that it's okay to go into indigenous reserves. We've heard about this on the Uruwi Indigenous Reserve at the beginning of the president's mandate, at the beginning of 2019. The direct effect of when you have a voice like this coming from the executive power is that often on the ground, this translates into illegal invasions, and often these illegal invasions end up in conflict and very often in murder, as we can see from the Global Witness report.
Wahyu, Perdana, is the mafias a problem when it comes to A, trying to get information, but actually, more importantly, trying to defend these people from being killed? This is a very murky world we're talking about, right?
About the mafia problem, we call it here, the problem is the mafia is inside the government. Because in many cases, in our law now, when some project or the extractive industry decided as the strategic for the economy, that means the military can interest in that conflict. That will be problem. Many parliamentary members, they related directly or indirectly, they have some shares in some extractive industries. That make the problem is very complicated. From the global witnesses, at least there is 3 killed from the environmentalist group, but till now, we're still on pandemic situation, but already 9 conflict, the big conflict in Indonesia. Then for us, the mafia is very clear. They're sitting between the parliamentary members, the others part of the government. But the problem that legalized by the new law in Indonesia, like the example for the new mineral mining law, they have problem in that law is they can call the military part of the conflict when the government decided some extractive industries part of the strategic for the economy. That will be problem because in the old law, even in our law, everyone struggle for the environment. They cannot sue by the government, but at the fact there is many big difference and the gap between the right law and the field area. Then the problem is many indigenous people, many labor organization or the peasant union, they're facing directly with the military. Then the mafia for us, we call it as oligarch in the government between the capital and the parliament member or the government.
Chris Madden in London. Wahyu makes a very good point. A lot of the people that are being killed are in such remote communities. They're indigenous people. They're people who perhaps don't know their rights because they're simply completely isolated. How do you deal with defending those people, other than the report which highlights exactly that? But how do you put pressure on government to actually take those people and their rights seriously?
Well, that's exactly what we're arguing. We're saying governments have that duty to protect human rights regardless of where they are in their own countries, and they're clearly failing to live up to that. You know, one aspect of it is to address the level of impunity that these attacks occur under. So we're seeing that across many different countries. In Colombia, for example, some estimates as high as 90% of these kind of cases never get to any kind of outcome of justice. So that duty to protect the human rights of their citizens is there, but also, you know, we're calling on governments to address this impunity issue and to fully investigate the attacks against defenders. And it's not just governments as well. Obviously, the companies have a role to play, and we're calling on all companies operating in areas where there are conflicts with communities to have a zero tolerance policy on reprisals against defenders and to fully comply with any investigation of attacks against them.
But this just isn't happening against indigenous people in far-flung parts of the world. 2017 in Standing Rock in Dakota in the US, there were huge protests. People were arrested for defending the environment. A lot of human rights groups in America have said that that was a trampling of human rights. We're talking about, a society that prides itself on the rights of its people. You're dealing with a very wide-ranging nature here. I mean, it's going to be mafias, it's going to be governments, it's going to be Western governments. I mean, where do you start? How do you start to defend these people?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's very well-respected and effective organisations working on the ground at a local and national level to push their governments to make the changes that I talked about. But there's also, that's exactly why we put out this report, is to highlight the issues globally and to draw attention to the sort of barriers that these organisations are facing to get these policy changes over the line. I mean, I think talking of Standing Rock, there are wins, there are victories that have been happening. That's one of the things we were definitely keen to put in this report. Whether or not that's the Ecuadorian Waorani people winning their right to reject oil exploration in their territory, or Indonesian Borneo indigenous peoples securing land title over their lands. So there are good news stories within this. Obviously, it's a massive issue, and a lot needs to be done. But this sort of international attention to it is a key aspect of that.
We are talking about international attention. Sam Cowie in Sao Paulo, the likelihood of the Brazilian president actually knowing about this report and taking it seriously is probably going to be quite low, given his pronouncements on the environment in the past.
Well, look, I mean, it's, no one report, no one group, no one activist, no one person ever changes a government's mind. It's a collective effort. And when we look at what's happening in Brazil right now, we are starting to see at least some very, very, very small changes to attitudes coming from the executive. Mainly due to pressure from European investment funds, which are basically threatening to divest from Brazil. These are asset managers that control like trillions in investments, and they're threatening to divest from Brazilian companies, from Brazilian bonds, if there isn't, if deforestation isn't slowed or halted. Deforestation is directly linked to murders of indigenous and other environmental defenders in Brazil. The murder of Paulo Paulinho Guajajara, which is mentioned in the Global Witness report, he was a forest guardian that defended the forest against logging groups and was killed, directly because of his work. So when you ask if it's one report that will change the government's mind, I'm sure the president is probably aware of this report. They're actually very sensitive, especially at the moment, to any bad press coming from abroad when it comes to the environment. Whether it's one report, one individual, one activist, no. But as a collective effort, a series of reports, a series of activists, a series of actions taken by activists and defenders, we are starting to see some small changes here, but it's up to civil society to keep up that pace.
Wahyu Perdana in Jakarta, isn't it a case that actually these companies are far too big, too powerful, too politically connected for any one government to actually put pressure to try and sort out a situation where 212 people are being killed internationally just for defending the environment?
For us now, we very understand the investment without the proper environmental standard will be problem. Then for us now, we're pushing the global community, including the UN, to taking step forward, not just voluntary guideline on business on human rights, but is legally binding treaties. Because in fact, it's very difficult. It's just the voluntary human rights standard, including in Indonesia. Our problem, no, the government, they want to take the article about, mention specifically about the corporate crime, become more or less just general crime, not as corporation. That will be problem because we know many investment come to Indonesia, but in other side, they just close their eyes about the problem at the field, at the community level. Because at least if we just work for case by case, it will take the many long time. Then for international, I think the financial approach will be good if they come with the legally binding treaties. Now it's still processing in the UN. Then we hope that can reducing the conflict, the victims on community level. Then this is, I think, more strategic approach than just do it case by case.
Chris Madden in London, Wahyu makes a point there, an optimistic point, that actually an internationally binding treaty by the UN, for example, might be the way forward to defend these people and to take a look at the environment generally. But there are several treaties in place when it comes to the environment, but people are walking out of them. The US has walked out of several environmental treaties since Donald Trump has been in power. How are you going to persuade people that yet more treaties are needed?
Well, I think the treaty that Wahyu was talking about would be the more mandatory end of it. The ones in the UN system at the moment are important, but they don't operate at a national level unless put into national law. But I think from a business perspective, I think that civil society needs to continue to push the business case aspect of this, right? So where there are conflicts with communities is bad for business, essentially. So companies that actually want to do well and investors that are behind them need to be doing their due diligence in terms of the community that they're hoping to operate in, and to ensure that any human rights impacts are mitigated against, and to ensure that where there is opposition or peaceful protest, that the people are allowed to do that in a safe and secure way.
But Chris, surely the point is this. Yes, those companies want to do well. Yes, some of them want to divest their money from the Amazon region because of deforestation. But those companies aren't in control. They're handing over to local groups, local companies are hiring out to local mafias getting involved. There are plenty of, the companies can say, look, we're doing as much as we can, but actually on the ground, the people that are harming environmentalists aren't necessarily being paid by those big companies. They're contractors. Isn't that an issue?
Absolutely, that's an issue, but I think it's something that we're increasingly seeing as not being taken as an argument anymore. That was seen as a legitimate excuse sort of 10 years ago, but supply chain due diligence is now firmly enshrined in a lot of different standards and the different articulations at an international level. Any good company would be doing due diligence throughout all of their supply chain, and that's definitely what civil society is pushing for to be rolled out across the board.
Well, I want to thank all our guests, Chris Madden, Sam Cowie and Wahyu Perdana. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.